Imagine a mechanical colossus designed to conquer the eternal ice of Antarctica. That was the Antarctic Snow Cruiser, a beast on wheels that promised to change polar exploration forever. But what was meant to be a triumph of engineering ended up becoming one of the strangest and most costly failures of its era. What went wrong? And how did it end up forgotten under tons of snow? Today, we'll tell you the full story. Let's begin. An expedition into the unknown. In 1940, a group of American explorers embarked on a monumental mission to map one of the last unexplored regions of the planet. Their destination was the South Pole, and to reach it they had to travel thousands of kilometers across a frozen landscape no human being had ever set foot on before. They ventured deep into the most hostile and impenetrable lands of Antarctica, a place where many had already failed and others had met their deaths. But this time, the explorers carried with them a technological advantage unlike anything seen before. A gigantic mobile base weighing 37 tons, capable of providing housing, workspace, and shelter for a small team during an entire year of isolation. Its name, the Antarctic Snow Cruiser, a mechanical beast built to conquer the harshest terrain on the planet. Lethal conditions and hidden ambitions. Before 1939, only 2 expeditions had managed to reach the South Pole, and just one made it back alive. Temperatures could plunge below minus 80 degrees Celsius, and winds could reach speeds of 200 or even 300 kilometers per hour. In a region spanning more than 14 million square kilometers of mountains and ice fields, human life simply wasn't meant to exist. Yet beneath that frozen, deadly landscape lay a treasure: immense reserves of oil and minerals. In 1939, several world powers were already staking claims on parts of the continent. But one curious detail stood out. The United States wasn't on the map of territorial claims. Although some American explorers had already set foot on Antarctic soil, their missions had been private ventures. To establish an official presence in the region, the government needed something bigger. Thus, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave the green light for the creation of the United States Antarctic Service Expedition, the American mission, conquering the ice. In the autumn of 1939, 2 ships set sail southward. On board were 125 men equipped with tons of supplies and technology. It was the most ambitious American expedition to date. Its objective, to explore unknown regions of Antarctica and establish 2 new bases at opposite ends of the continent. Among the arsenal of scientific and logistical tools, one piece stood out above all the rest: the Antarctic Snow Cruiser. Nothing like it had ever been built before. The size of a small building, it was designed not only to transport 5 explorers for a full year, but also to carry its own airplane. A science fiction vessel on ice. Designed by the Armor Institute of Technology in Chicago, the Antarctic Snow Cruiser looked like it came straight out of a Jules Verne novel. Its 3-meter-high rubber wheels were meant to absorb the shocks of the unforgiving Antarctic terrain. If an ice crevasse appeared in its path, some as wide as 4.5 meters, the craft could retract its wheels with a hydraulic system and slide over its massive front and rear overhangs as if floating across the abyss. To endure months without outside contact, the vehicle ran on a diesel-electric hybrid propulsion system. Instead of driving the wheels directly, the diesel engines generated electricity that powered motors on each axle. This solution eliminated the need for drive shafts and complex gearboxes, reducing mechanical weak points, a true feat of engineering for its time. Extreme self-sufficiency in the heart of winter. The Antarctic cold could kill you in minutes, but the snow cruiser was ready. The engine's cooling system circulated through the interior, providing heat to the living quarters, Even the wheels, when retracted, could be warmed to prevent them from freezing. This mechanical colossus was designed for self-sufficiency. It stored enough fuel, food, and supplies for an entire year. The 5 crew members had areas to sleep, work, and live together, creating an autonomous ecosystem in motion. And as if that weren't enough, it carried on board a dismountable biplane, which could be used for reconnaissance flights and to photograph vast stretches of Antarctic territory. The idea was ambitious. With this machine, the Americans would explore more Antarctic land in a few months than all previous expeditions combined. The star of the headlines. News of the expedition made the front pages, but what truly captured the world's imagination was the Antarctic Snow Cruiser. It was like watching the future glide over eternal ice. When it rolled out of the factory on October 24, 1939, crowds gathered to see it pass. A marvel of engineering rolling on giant tires, carrying a promise of conquest and discovery. But not everything would go so perfectly. As the vessel prepared for its epic journey, the gears of fate began to turn in the opposite direction. Race against time, the rush to build a mechanical marvel. Although the first sketches and blueprints of the Antarctic Snow Cruiser began appearing in 1937, it wasn't until the spring of 1939 that the final decision was made to include the machine in the Antarctic expedition. That left the engineers barely 6 months to complete its design and build it from scratch. Under relentless pressure, the teams worked non-stop, day and night, to meet the deadline. On October 24th of that same year, the vehicle rolled out of its assembly plant in Chicago. But instead of undergoing rigorous technical trials, as one would expect for a machine with such a critical mission, it was sent directly to Boston, where the expedition's ships were already waiting. The journey would cover 1,600 kilometers by road. The idea was that this trip would serve as a sort of improvised final test. From national promise to rolling embarrassment, excitement was in the air. The public and the press were fascinated by the idea of this futuristic giant crossing half the country. However, what was supposed to be a triumphant parade soon turned into a string of embarrassing setbacks. Just a few days into the trip, the snow cruiser got stuck in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The cause? Torrential rains that turned the roads into slippery tracks. Traction vanished, and the vehicle ended up sliding into a ditch. What followed was 3 full days of grueling work to free it from the mud. Not the debut expected for a supposedly unstoppable machine. Shortly afterward, a hydraulic line failed and a minor crash damaged one of the bumpers. But the biggest issue was something else: speed, or rather, the lack of it. Although it was theoretically supposed to reach 48 kilometers per hour, it barely managed to crawl along at a fraction of that. The agonizing slowness of an ambitious giant. The main culprit for the snow cruiser's slowness was its propulsion system. Each wheel had a 75 horsepower electric motor, but with a total weight of 37 tons, that translated into just 8 horsepower per ton. Enough to move, but not to impress. As it crept along at a snail's pace, the snow cruiser caused traffic chaos on every route it traveled. Outside Boston, it triggered what was considered one of the largest traffic jams of the era, affecting more than 70,000 vehicles. What should have been an 8-day trip ended up taking nearly 3 weeks. Finally, on November 12, 1939, the giant reached Boston with only 48 hours to spare before being loaded onto the ship. Many began to wonder if it was really ready to survive Antarctica. But the machinery of spectacle and excitement was already in motion. There was no turning back. Heading to the end of the world. On November 15th, the most ambitious American expedition ever to Antarctica officially set sail. The snow cruiser was aboard, carrying the hopes of a nation and a long list of unresolved problems. The worst was yet to come. Welcome to the ice, the final disappointment. The gigantic machine, built in just 11 weeks during a Midwestern summer, touched snow for the first time in January 1940. And from the very first moment, it was clear it was out of its element. If it had already shown weakness on asphalt, on the rough, uneven terrain of Antarctica, it was utterly useless. The main obstacle was the wheels. They were enormous and strong, yes, but completely smooth. In theory, this made them durable and shock-absorbing. In practice, they sank and spun helplessly in the snow. A machine designed to cross frozen mountain ranges couldn't move even half a meter forward. Improvised solutions and absurd maneuvers. The decision to use smooth tires is one of the most criticized today. In their defense, the engineers had no time to design anything new. They used tires originally intended for swamp vehicles. They could have carved treads into them, but feared they would clog with snow and ice. There was also no time to test anything in real conditions. In a desperate attempt to regain traction, technicians fitted chains to the wheels and doubled up the front tires. Nothing worked. After weeks of failed trials, they discovered that the vehicle's weight wasn't evenly distributed. Ironically, the best way to move it forward was in reverse. And that's what they did. On its longest journey, the snow cruiser covered 148 kilometers in reverse, circling around the base camp. However, this improvised solution further limited the already slow speed of the vehicle. It was clear it would never reach the South Pole that way. End of the journey. From exploration vessel to immobile laboratory. Frustrated but pragmatic, the mission leaders made a drastic decision: to convert the snow cruiser into a static laboratory. It would remain parked in place, serving as shelter and a workspace, while the rest of the expedition continued without it. Not for long. The growing threat of World War II forced the United States to pull back. The mission was canceled, and the teams returned home. The snow cruiser was left abandoned in the snow, buried by time and history. The frozen legacy of the snow cruiser. In 1958, a scientific expedition managed to locate it beneath several meters of snow. It was briefly unearthed and then disappeared again. Today, it's unknown whether it still lies buried somewhere in Antarctica, or if it was carried off by an ice shelf into the depths of the ocean. What we do know is that the Antarctic Snow Cruiser was a victim of its own enthusiasm. Conceived with extreme optimism and without time for real testing, it remained a technical marvel that never fulfilled its purpose. If the story of the Antarctic Snow Cruiser surprised you, this giant adventure full of dreams and challenges, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss more fascinating stories of legendary machines.